Hello everybody, welcome back to Trinity Tech Academy where we learn, build and aim. We're going to continue our practical introduction to Python programming. In today's class, we're going to continue our first module, which is the basics, by learning about the random module in Python. What we're going to talk about in today's class, we're going to look at what the random module is, how random numbers are generated, the core random functions, practical random examples, and a quick reference of the random module. To begin with, what is a random module? So the random module is a built-in Python module that generates pseudo-random numbers. These numbers are called pseudo-random because they are generated by a mathematical algorithm, not just through random as you might think. So the random module is good for games, simulation, sampling, and most everyday uses. But for cryptography and security, it is most advisable that you use the secret module instead of the random module to generate numbers. And you also need to understand that this module must be imported before it can be used because it is not available by default. How are the random numbers generated? Well, Python's random module uses the Mersenne-Twister algorithm, which is one of the most widely tested and reliable pseudo-random generators. It uses the seed value as a start value and always produces same sequence, that is if the seed value remains the same. But the seed is automatically set from system time, from real scenarios, because most people actually use this random function without knowing how it is actually generated. So your system time is actually used as a seed. So because the system time changes, that is why over time your random number is going to be changing. But if you supply a default seed value or a static seed value which remains the same, so it's likely that your random numbers are going to be the same when you generate them over and over again. That is, setting your seed value manually makes your result reproducible. Let's talk about some of the core random functions. And to do that, I'm going to switch back to Visual Studio where we'll write some code snippets to see how this actually applies. I have my Visual Studio set up, and in my terminal, I'll type the command Python to activate my Python shell. And the first module function we're going to talk about is the random. So from the random module, we have another function called random. So what this random function actually does is it generates a float number between 0 and 1. But you need to understand that the upper bound, which is 1, can never be included in your return value. Right? So let's quickly see how this works. So we need to import the random module. Then we need to call the random module. From the random module, we are using the random function. So when I call this, it automatically generates a number or a floating value between 0 and 1. So you can see generated 0.3768 and thereabout. When I run this again, random 0.7495 thereabout. And lastly, I'm going to run this again, random 0.136 and thereabout. So that is a function of the random function, generates number between 0 and up to but not 1 included. Now let's talk about the next function, which is the randint. The randint generates random integers between a range. So it returns a random integer x which falls between the range of a to b. Now let's try this out. So I'm going to import random. I'm going to call random randint, which is a function. Now this time around I'm going to pass 1, which is going to be our range, that is from 1 to 6. A good example of this is maybe simulating our dice, right? Yes, simulating the dice from 1 to 6. So running this, random number is going to be generated from the range of 1 to 6. So we have 5. Let me run this again with another value from 1 to 100. So a random number between 1 and 100. So we have the number 78. I can generate a random between just two values. Let's say maybe the flipping of a coin, 0, let's say 1. So of course, this is true or false, or maybe head or tail, right? When we are talking about flipping of the coin. Now, when I run this, of course, it's going to be just 0 or 1. So I have 1. Let me run this again. Find it interesting. So I have 0. If I run it again the third time and the last, let's see what we have. 0, 1. Oh, it gives us 0 again. So that is it about the randint. Next, we're going to talk about the uniform function. So the uniform function generates a floating value between a range. It returns a random float x between the range a to b. So as you can see, for the uniform function, it can actually include both endpoints. That is, both a and b can be returned as a value during the random generation. So let's quickly try this out. I can first of all import random, then I'll call random.uniform. So let's say 1.0, because this actually is going to be a floating point values or range 1.0 to 10.0. Now I have 8.0452 and thereabout. I can also call it again random.uniform. Let's say from 0 to 0.5. So I have 0.08. Now I can also include negative range number like minus or -1 to +1. So it gives us 0.3052 and thereabout. So that is it about the uniform functions. It returns a value between two floating point range, and the endpoints can equally be included. So next we're going to talk about the randrange function. So the randrange function can be passed 3 arguments: a start value, a stop value, and a step. The randrange works more like the Python's range function, but it returns a random element. Now, the stop is not usually included when you use the randrange, and the step is also optional. Now, let's look at what I'm equally going to import random again, and I'll call random.randrange, and I'm going to supply 0 and 10 as the argument. So this is going to actually pick a random number from what? From 0 to 9. So just like we stated here, stop is not included. So when you're using the randrange, the stop value, which is 10, is usually not going to be included. So you're only going to pick a random number from 0 to 9. So if I execute or run this, enter, you have 9. Let me call that again, randrange from 0 10 gives us 2 this time around, randrange. So let me pass a step value now. That's from 0 to 10. Let me pass 2 as a step. What 2 actually implies here as a step value is it's listing that range as a sequence of numbers incremented by 2. For instance, here we have 0 to 10. This is going to be a list or a range of numbers from 0 to 2, 4, 6, 8. But 10 is not going to be included. So I'm picking a random number from this list. So this can, in another way around, be seen like a listing or picking a random number from even numbers within the range of 0 to 10, right? So when I run this, I have 0. Let me run it again for the sake of information. it's still going to give me an even number because the list is incremented by 2. So it gives me a 2. Let's run it again the third time and the last. So it gives me a 4. So this is actually going to be a range of even numbers because the step here specifies that each number is going to be incremented. Now let's try one more, which is going to be the last. Let's increment our step by 5. So this time around, it's going to be a list or a range of numbers from 0 to 100, or rather, let's say from 1. Let's use 1. Let's say from 1 to 100. So this is going to be a range of numbers from 1 to 96. Because from 1, you add 5, that gives you 6. You add 5, that gives you 11. You add 5, that gives you 16. Up until 96. But at 96, when you add 5, that's going to be 101, which is even over than the stop value. So that's not going to be included. So quickly, click on enter. I have 71. Let me run this again. The last time, 100 by 5. And that's going to be 41. So that is it about the rand range. Next, we're going to talk about the choice function. I import random again. So all these functions are part of the random module. So that's why we always import random. The random module has so many functions in it. So for you to be able to use those functions, you must first of all import that class, or you must first of all call that class to your program. And that is why we are always importing random, because all of these functions are included in this random, and that is why we are doing the dot notation random. So this time around is going to be choice. So you are saying from this class import the function choice. Now talking about random.choice, we're going to pass a sequence of numbers or values, and the choice function is going to pick a random item from that sequence. So this sequence can be list, it can be tuples, it can be strings. So far we haven't talked about lists, tuples, or strings, but we're going to do that in our subsequent lessons. Now let's pass a list. A list is specified using the square bracket. You pass some values in it. These are all integer values, and you close your list with the closing square bracket. So this is known as a list in Python. Square bracket with values inside. The values can actually be mixed. They can be integers, they can be floats, they can be strings. But to make things simple here, let's just use integers. So when I provide this, so this is now known as a sequence because it is a list of values that can be iterated over. So when I run this, enter, you can see it picks a random number from this sequence or from this list. So I have random.choice. Okay, this time around, let me pass a string. So what is a string? A string includes a two code. So I say, maybe let's say Python numbers. So this is a string. Anything includes in two quotes, quotation, like this, it's a string. So if I pass this as a sequence and I run it or click on enter, it's going to pick a random item from this whole list. So let's see what it gives us. It gives us a B. So I can equally run this again. So what I just did is, by clicking my upper arrow, it takes you back to the last command you ran in your Python shell. So I'll click on my upper arrow. So it brings back that command and I run it again. So this time around, let's see what it's going to give us from our string. It gives us an R. So let me run it one more time. This time around, it gives us the uppercase N. So that is it for the random.choice or for the choice function. You pass a sequence, which can be a list, tuple, or strings, and it returns an item from that sequence. Now, still on the choice function, you can pass an extra argument, which is k. K is going to be a number that specifies how many items you need to pick from that sequence. So I'm going to import random. I'll call random.choice, and then I'm going to pass a list of strings. Let's say colors, this is green, and I'm going to specify my k. So my k here stands for the number of items to pick from my sequence. So when I run this, I have an error. I have an error here because I'm using random.choice instead of random.choices. So I'm going to move back, use my up arrow to move back to that command again, and I'm going to include an s, random.choices. So I'm going to run this again. So this time around, of course, it's going to return the 3 items because there are only 3 items. So let me add another item to my list. Let's say yellow, and maybe let's say right. So when I run this, it's going to pick 3 items randomly from the sequence. So it picked green, green, and green. So you need to understand that it says it picks, or the random.choices pick multiple items with replacement. So that means it can pick the same item multiple times, and that is exactly what we have here. You can see it picks green 3 times. Let me run that command. So this time around it picks blue twice, and it picked green just once. That is it about the random.choices. So we can also specify an optional weight parameter. So this weight parameter will specify which items from our list has the tendency or likelihood of being picked severally. So let's import random. So I have random choices. So this time around, let me pass in 1, 2, 3 as my value. So I have just 3 values. Then I'll pass the optional parameter weight. So I'm saying that from this list, 1 is my first value, so I need 1 to have more likelihood of being picked from these 3 items, so I can give it a higher weight of maybe 3, and then I can give a lower weight of maybe 1 and 1. So this is by position. So 3 is for 1, 1 is for 2, 1 is for 3. So what this actually means here is that 1 is likely to be picked more than 2 and 3. So I'm also going to specify k, which is number of items I need picked from this list. So let's say I want to pick 10 items. So remember, choices can have a replacement. You can pick multiple items with replacement. So that means 1 can be picked severally. So I need 10 items to be picked from these 3. So when I run this, so you can see I have my 10 values here, but as you can see, I have 1 appearing 3 times, I have 2 appearing 3 times, and I have 3 appearing 4 times. Let me run this command again. So this time around, you can see it gives me, or it gives 1 higher weight. So it picked 1 severally more than any other value. So you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. More than half of my number of items to be picked. That is because I've given 1 the weight of 3. That's the likelihood of being picked. This is how you can specify some of these arguments to the random choices function. So lastly, we're going to talk about the random.sample function, or the sample function. You can pick multiple items. That's the sample function can pick multiple items without replacement. It will return a list of k unique random elements since it is without replacement, and items are never repeated. So this is like stating the same thing over and over again. And we say that k cannot be larger than the length of the sequence. So if you are passing a list with 5 numbers, you can specify k to be 6 because it is already more than the number of the sequence. So let's do this again. I'll clear my terminal. I import random and I call random.sample. This time around, I'm going to pass 1, 3, 5, 7, and 8. I'm going to specify 2 as my number of items to be. So when I run this, I'll have a new list of items. So I have 5 and 3. Remember, it is without replacement. So let's try a list or a sequence that has multiple items repeated to see what are it going to be. So if I pass 2 again, so this is supposed to be, the return value is supposed to be a unique value without replacement. So if I run this, I have 3 and 5. If I run it again, I have 1 and 3. So this is a quick reference on the random module. You can look at some of the functions, what they return. Lastly, we're going to look at some practical random examples. Pick a random winner from a list. So it's the same as the programs or the snippets we've been writing earlier. So I'll just define a variable called participants. And I'm going to assign it a list of names. Let's say Alice. Let's Sam. Let's John. And let's close the list. Now I'm going to say the winner is random choice. So I'm just going to pass the participant variable as the argument to choice, and the choice function is a random winner. I can print the winner value to screen. Okay, pick Sam. So let's try out simulating a coin flip 10 times. So I can say flips random. So this time around, I'm going to use random choices, where I can specify the list. Okay, for a flip, a coin flip, I have a head, and I have a tail. So I'm going to these are just the 2 values in my list. Then I'm going to specify I need to pick these items like 10 times. So let's see what we're going to have. I need to print out the value of flips to see the random items that's going to be picked 10 times. So you can see it picks head, tail, head, head, tail, 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 tail. So that is it for these 2 short programs. You can do well to try out the remaining programs by yourself. And that will be all for this class.